Hi, my name is Scott McMahon. This is Scottie Teaches. Welcome. Today we're going to be using Adobe Illustrator. We're going to learn about patterns, how to make them, how to edit them, how to use them. Let's get into it right now. So what we're looking at right now is just a sample of some patterns and how we can use them. And I know it seems like there might be a lot of patterns right here, but I think there's three, four, maybe four patterns and then a couple of variations, but really it's just four patterns. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to make patterns. So patterns, we'll go to this file, and patterns can be made a couple of different ways. The first way I'm going to show you is with the menu. So we take an object like this amoeba type, tripod type shape, and if we go up under object, 75% of the way down there's an item called pattern, the ability to make the pattern. That's what we can do. We're going to make the pattern, and as soon as I do that, I'm going to get a warning that this pattern has been added to the swatches panel, so that's important. And you can turn that off once you understand that it's added to the swatches panel. I don't need to see that again, and we'll say OK. So now it's going to show me a couple of things. It's going to show me the object that I turned into a pattern. It now hides anything else that was on my Illustrator file, and it moves that to the center, and it shows the pattern as it exists right now. The pattern itself, as we can see from this blue line, is the outer edge. We're going to show you how to edit that in a sec. That is just the first way to understand how to make a pattern. So that was selecting an object, under object, down to pattern, to make. Now, we are not done because we have this dialog box that came up, and we're going to go through this when we go to use and edit it. But right now, I'm just going to give it a name called tripod, and right now I'm not worried about anything else. And unfortunately, from a user interface standpoint, where you implement this is up at the top. It drops down and you get this gray bar. We have save a copy, done, and cancel. And in our situation, we want to hit done, and you'll see that it is added up into our swatches. And now our Illustrator file is back to showing us what was there to begin with. Now, understanding that the pattern was made and it was put into the swatches palette, that is also how we can make patterns directly. You can just grab your object like this diamond and just drag it to your swatches palette. The difference is that yes, the pattern was made. We see it here as a swatch, but we are not given the information and shown the grid of what the pattern looks like. So if we wanted to see that, we'd have to actually double click on it. We get to see that here is our checkerboard pattern, and I'll explain in a sec why we have a checkerboard pattern. I'm going to call this again, we'll call this tablecloth. Tablecloth. And again, I've got to go up here to say done. And then I have two patterns available. And if we notice that it doesn't quite look the same, it's because I actually filled this diamond with the pattern. So I'm going to go back and just fill it with the black, because you can, once you have it as a pattern, you can fill it into any shape you want. So that is how you make patterns. So you can pull down menu, again, pull down menu, pattern, make, or just drag an object to the palette, the swatches palette. Those are the two ways. Now, once you have a pattern, what can you do with a pattern? Well, we're going to go over to another page, and we're going to remake 4 different patterns to see how we can use them. So here's a line. We're going to make it the same way. I'm just going to drag it to the palette. It is automatically a pattern. This orange circle, drag that. It's now a pattern. This group of 5 colors, that's now a pattern. And even this type, it's live type. And now I have 4 patterns. And if we want to see what those 4 patterns look like as default patterns, I'm going to highlight this box, fill it with the line, and it doesn't look like there's a pattern in there. Fill that one with the orange, fill that one with that, and fill this one with the type. So right now, I'll zoom out a bit. That is our standard out of the box. We copied this, we get this pattern. Any of these create these automatic patterns. Now, that is not all we can do with these patterns. So, if I wanted to edit, say, this line pattern, again, I'm going to double click on the pattern and we see what the pattern is made up of. It's showing us in dark what's making up the pattern, and the gray is showing us how the pattern exists. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this lines, because I'm creative that way. So right now this is a grid. It has a width of 2 points, and if you're new to the channel, you're going to get used to watching me measure stuff in points and picas, because I'm old like that. Height is 30. Now this is the object, so it is making it exactly the same as the object. And down here we can see there's areas for overlap to show, and we'll show what overlap means and how many copies. This is only to show us the preview. If I wanted to see it bigger, to see how the pattern played out bigger, and then we can also dim the pattern down so that we have more focus on what's actually making the pattern, etc., etc. So if I click done, then that will now, it's, when it comes to lines, it's a weird thing, but you have to sort of edit the pattern so it will appear. So right now we're looking at a pattern that shows us this line. So if I wanted to change the appearance, if I wanted it to seem a little bit denser, so I could actually make it a little bit, I guess that's the smallest I can make it. So let's make it less dense. So let's make it 4. So I really spread those out. I'm going to click done, and we see that immediately our pattern has changed. The same thing can happen with the orange. Let's double click on the pattern. Let's name it. And again, I didn't get a chance to name it because I dragged the orange circle into the swatches palette. Orange, and again, I'm super creative, so it's an orange circle. This time, instead of a grid, we're now going to look at the different kinds of patterns that we can create. So we have a grid, which is just lining up horizontal and vertical. We can have a brick. So what that is doing is offsetting every line. So it's offsetting half, and we can see here by the brick offset. Now the brick offset, if we use brick offset, and there is by row, which is horizontal, and there is by column, which is vertical. Let's go back to horizontal, the row, and the brick offset, there is half, which means that it is moving over half the distance of this width number. So instead of it being lined up on the 9, it's lined up on 4.5 points. And there are lots of fractions to create lots of different patterns using brick. It's up to you. So we'll just stick with half for now. So now we're going to start to see what the width and height. Right now this circle is 9 points by 9 points since the edge. We can see this blue box, and again I'm going to zoom in just so we can see it a little bit tighter. So now why it's not touching, why it doesn't seem to be touching on the top, is because we've moved them over. If I change it back to a grid, we see that they are touching. And this is what this spacing, width and height, will do. If I want to change the width and the height of the space that surrounds and creates the pattern, this is where I do it. And if I apply the shift over, and this is where we can create sort of that polka dot pattern without it being geometric. Let's change that a bit so it's a little bit seems a little bit equal. There. So that's what those numbers do. So we're going to save that. We're going to say done. And now we see that it applies it. And then it's a much more pleasing pattern now. Now let's work on this pattern. So this pattern is made up of these 5 colors. We have the black, the yellow, the blue, the green, the red. So if I double click on it, and we'll call that tartan, because sure, why not? So the tartan is going by the size, and it's 9 points wide by 8 points high. So again, I can change the level of the number of squares that's previewing. But let's look at this overlap. That's what we're going to do with this one. We're going to zoom right in, because these numbers are bigger, or the same as the size of the object. I can go bigger and create a space. This now is creating a 2-point space because there's a point on either side. So now, but I can also make them smaller. And then this just determines what's overlapping. Are they overlapping going right? Or are they overlapping going left? And that's up to you. So let's apply this with the overlap. Tartan, we're going to say done. We'll zoom back out. And then on the last one, with the type, we're going to double click. And a couple things. Now that the type is live, the type is still live. So I could edit it. If I made a mistake, we had this great store was named after iron. So now we're going to change it to fa. And let's kern that a bit. And you'll notice that as I'm kerning it, the box has already been set for the pattern. So let's just kern that. And let's make this one, we talked about brick, we talked about brick column, and we can also have hexagon, so that the pattern is based on hexagon by column or hexagon by row. So let's do hexagon by column. And let's spread that out a bit that way. And take that down so it makes a very interesting pattern. And we're going to go all the way up here to done. So right there, we zoom out and we see what started our patterns, and then how we could edit those patterns and what we can do with them with the different options. Now, we are not done there, because patterns get a lot of their strength by being able to do all kinds of things within the box or the area that we're filling. For instance, on this one, just because my pattern is this size doesn't mean, or in this angle doesn't mean that I have to keep it that way. So if I wanted to rotate the pattern but not the box, I wanted the box to be square, rectilinear like it is, horizontal and vertical, but I wanted to have diagonal lines, then I can double click on the rotation tool, and this is very important, that here we're going to transform the object or transform the patterns. So we're going to click off on transform objects, and we're going to only transform the pattern, and let's preview that at 45, and ta-da! We have one pattern, but now we've used it in a different way. So I'm going to say OK. And there, I have a pattern. Let's see what we can do with the orange. If instead of rotating, let's say I wanted to scale it. So I'm going to double click on the scale tool. Transform patterns is on, transform objects is off. Let's go and make this 25% and say OK. So now I have this big orange dot pattern and I have this small orange dot pattern. And let's do the same with this. Instead of this one, let's go with the skew. So double click on the skew, Again, transform objects is off, transform patterns is on. Let's say okay. So now, again, we have a pattern that we can do some very interesting stuff with. And this one, very interesting thing that you'll notice is that this is now overlapping and it matches up perfectly. So if I wanted to have something that had a pattern, but I wanted to change color, or I wanted to change something about the content of the pattern, what I can do is I can actually duplicate the pattern. So all I need to do is click the swatch, drag it down to the new swatch. I have a duplicate. So there are two versions. So now on the second one, I'm going to apply the second pattern. Right now they are the same, but if I double click, remember that's how we edit, double click on the pattern and I highlight and I change that to, I don't know, pink, and we're going to call it pink, and we're going to go done. We're done, and then we see that they match up perfectly. Now, what is the advantage to something like this? Well, then I can go into my object, I can grab the corner point of both objects, and I can move, and my pattern stays perfectly lined up. It's just two different patterns, but because they're based on the exact same pattern, they line up. So right there are some very interesting ways in which we can use patterns. So how can, and I mean, we could keep doing this on and on, but now to use a pattern. So what we're going to do is grab no, we'll do it here. Sorry, I'm mistaken. We're going to do it here. So now we can start to mix and match. We can actually put this pattern, we can put the line pattern here, we can put the line pattern again here, and on this one we're going to rotate it 90 degrees, transform the patterns but not the object, and we're going to say okay. And then because the base objects are the same size, I could have made a pattern that was the grid, but if I wanted to make it offset a bit to add some design feature to it, then I have this advantage. Let's go back to the orange, and let's go and add the orange to this one. I'm going to duplicate the orange pattern, double click on it, change the orange to, let's say, a green, and we're going to say done. So now I want to add the orange to this one, and if I line them up, they don't line up because the patterns weren't lining up that way. The patterns were lining up this way. But I could, from a design standpoint, take both of those, change them to a multiply, and all of a sudden I've got something very interesting that I can work with. I can move just one of the points to create sort of an interesting design. Boom. Ta-da! Patterns are our friends. So, recapping. How we make a pattern. Grab an object, drag it to the swatch. Or highlight an object, under object, to pattern, to make. Once we have patterns in our swatches, to edit them, all you need to do is double click on them, and you have access to change the content, so the color, the shape. You also have the opportunity to change the name, change the way in which the pattern is created, the space the pattern takes up, whether or not it overlaps left or right, top to bottom, and then just some display features while you're making the pattern. That's it for patterns in Adobe Illustrator. I appreciate you hanging around. If you have any Illustrator, InDesign, or Photoshop questions, pop them in the comments below. If you feel like subscribing, subscribe. Ring that bell. It'll let you know when I put these videos up. Thanks very much and enjoy your day.